The offer arrived in a crisp, anonymous envelope, delivered by a private courier. Inside, a single sheet of paper contained a proposition that was both ludicrous and life-changing. For 3 months, you will become the public girlfriend of Peter Blackwood. You will attend events, smile for the cameras, and be the perfect partner. The payment offered was enough to fund my struggling independent news site for 5 years. But the real prize wasn't the money. It was the last line. You will be granted unrestricted access to his life. They thought they were hiring an actress. They didn't know they were letting a predator into the lion's den. The computer screen flickered mercilessly, the lone cursor on the blank white document mocking Elena Parker. It was nearly midnight, and the newsroom office was silent, save for the hum of the server racks and her own weary sighs. Before her, a tangled web of numbers and financial transactions revolved around one name, BLC Holdings, a true shell company, no office, no employees, just a perfect front for laundering dirty money. And every trail, no matter how faint, pointed to one place, the Blackwood Group. Elena rubbed her temples. She knew she was onto a massive story, a bombshell that could shake Wall Street to its core. But every door was slammed shut in her face. BLC Holdings was protected by layers of solid legal firewalls, and to break through, she needed something from the inside. An opportunity. A miracle. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. It was her best friend, calling about the wedding Elena had promised to attend. She let out a sigh. An evening spent in a gown, making polite small talk amidst a sea of strangers flaunting their wealth. It was the last thing she wanted to do right now. But a promise was a promise. At least, she thought, it was a way to temporarily forget that blinking cursor. The 5-star hotel ballroom was a symphony of opulence. Light from dozens of colossal crystal chandeliers danced on wine glasses, turning them into liquid rubies. The air was filled with the delicate scent of lilies and half-hearted conversations. Elena, in a simple yet elegant sea green silk dress, felt like a dissonant note. She didn't belong here. Her journalist's intuition made her see everything through a different lens. How much were those smiles worth? Which contracts paid for that sparkling jewelry? She chose a secluded corner, observing quietly, hoping to become invisible. But in a space where solitude was seen as a failure, her lone presence quickly became a target for curious glances and whispers. And then, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. All conversation seemed to cease, and every eye turned towards the main entrance. Peter Blackwood had arrived. He didn't just enter, he commanded the space. In a perfectly tailored black suit, he exuded an aura of cold power that made everything around him fade. His face looked as if it were carved from ice, and his steel-gray eyes swept across the room with absolute indifference. He was a walking empire, a legend Elena had written dozens of analytical articles about but had never been able to approach. And then, the unbelievable happened. That walking empire was heading straight for her secluded corner. Elena's heart skipped a beat. He sat down in the chair opposite her, a decisive move as if it had always belonged to him. The entire room held its breath. "Elena Parker," he said, his voice deep and devoid of emotion, but the fact that he knew her name stunned her. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, trying to keep her own voice steady. He didn't answer immediately. His gray eyes glanced over the curious guests, then returned to focus on her. "I have a proposition," he said bluntly. "A short performance. Play the part of my companion for tonight." Elena blinked, half in disbelief. "Why would I do that?" "Because," he leaned forward, his voice a powerful whisper, "we are both being hunted. You by gossips, and I by pre-arranged matchmaking attempts. We can be each other's shields. Just for tonight." His logic was cold and irrefutable. Her journalist's intuition screamed one word: danger. But another part of her, the curious and competitive part, was intrigued. This was Peter Blackwood. An exclusive interview that no other journalist could get. A small smile touched her lips. "What are the terms, Mr. Blackwood?" "The terms are that you will have a peaceful evening," he replied, a glint of something almost like amusement in his icy eyes. "And so will I." And just like that, the performance began. Peter stood up, gallantly offering her his hand. When her hand touched his, an unexpected jolt ran up her spine. He led her around the room, introducing her to a few business partners with just the right amount of possessiveness in his tone. "This is Elena." No further explanation was given, but no one dared to ask. His presence was a statement in itself. Elena played her part perfectly, smiling, nodding, and occasionally offering a clever comment. She realized that under the shield of Peter Blackwood, this luxurious world suddenly became much more breathable. 3 days later, a jet-black Bentley pulled up in front of the newsroom, drawing every eye. The door opened, and Peter Blackwood stepped out. He wasn't in a suit, just a simple white shirt and trousers, but his regal aura was undiminished. He waited for her at a quiet, discreet coffee shop nearby. "I think our performance the other night was quite successful," he began as soon as she sat down, without any superfluous greetings. "It helped me avoid a few awkward questions," Elena admitted, ordering an espresso. "And you?" "It bought me some time," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "But time is running out. The board is pressuring me. They see my single status as a liability. Richard Hale, my vice president, a friend I trust immensely, has advised me to find a stable relationship to reassure the investors." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And you want me to be that stability?" "I want to hire you," he said bluntly. "A 3-month contract. You will play the role of my girlfriend. Attend events, appear in public, a business transaction. You will be paid a handsome sum and gain access to places you normally couldn't." Elena almost laughed. It was so shameless. So typically Blackwood. She was about to refuse immediately. She wasn't an actress, and she wouldn't sell her self-respect. But then, a thought flashed in her mind. Access to places she couldn't normally go. That meant access to the inner workings of the Blackwood Group. A golden opportunity to investigate BLC Holdings. The journalistic devil on her shoulder was cheering. She crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair, her expression shifting from disdain to calculation. "A handsome sum isn't tempting enough for me, Mr. Blackwood. I want more." "Name it," he said, unfazed. "I want information," she said, her voice sharp. "Not trade secrets, but I want the right to ask questions, to observe. I want to understand how your empire operates." Peter was silent for a moment, his gray eyes seeming to scan through every layer of her thoughts. He was too smart not to realize she had her own agenda. But perhaps he was also confident enough that his empire had nothing to hide. "Deal," he said decisively. "But there's one rule. When we are together, you are mine. No recorders, no notes. Only trust." "Trust in a fake relationship?" Elena smirked. "How ironic." "Consider it a challenge," he replied, the corner of his mouth curving into an almost imperceptible smile for the first time. "Starting tomorrow night, a family dinner, a small test." The dinner took place at the Blackwood family estate, an ancient mansion set amidst vast gardens. It wasn't ostentatiously luxurious, but possessed the quiet beauty of old-world power. Elena felt more nervous than at any event she had ever attended. Emily, Peter's younger sister, greeted her with a warm smile. The girl had bright eyes and a gentle demeanor, a complete contrast to her brother. "I finally get to meet you," Emily said. "Peter is always hiding you away." Elena could only offer a polite smile in return. And then, Richard Hale appeared. He looked dapper in a light gray suit, with a friendly smile and a warm handshake. He clapped Peter on the shoulder. "I knew it. Sooner or later this iceberg had to melt. Hello, Miss Parker. A pleasure to meet you." On the surface, everything was perfect. Richard played the role of a loyal friend and colleague. He told humorous stories about Peter, making the atmosphere comfortable. But Elena, with a journalist's eye, noticed the small things. When Richard placed his hand intimately on Emily's shoulder, she saw Peter's sister flinch slightly, her smile becoming strained for a moment. When Richard spoke about the company's future with an almost excessive enthusiasm, Elena saw a flicker of ill-concealed ambition in his eyes. Her journalist's gut told her something was wrong with this man. During the meal, Peter would occasionally place a hand on her waist, or lean in to whisper something in her ear. Those gestures, though fake, still made her heart race. He was acting, and he was a very good actor. But sometimes, when their eyes met, she felt something else, a curiosity, an inexplicable connection. When the dinner ended, Richard shook her hand. "Welcome to the family. I hope you can put up with his temper." He laughed loudly, but his eyes didn't. On the way back, silence filled the car. "What do you think?" Peter suddenly asked, breaking the silence. "Emily is lovely," Elena answered safely. "And Richard is very enthusiastic." Peter nodded. "Richard has been with me since the beginning. I owe him a lot." Elena said nothing more. She looked out the window, the city lights streaking by like shooting stars. She had stepped into Peter Blackwood's world. The stage was set, but she had an unsettling feeling that in this complex play, she wasn't the only one wearing a mask, and the real villain might be hiding right behind the friendliest smile. The pretend contract had split Elena's life into two parallel worlds. By day, she was a journalist buried in dry numbers. By night, she donned glamorous dresses, becoming the woman on Peter Blackwood's arm, a constant smile on her face and a perfect performance in her heart. Galas, charity fundraisers, product launches, they became their stage, and they were excellent actors. Peter, with his naturally cold demeanor, only needed to add a touch of feigned affection to make everyone believe them completely. He would hold her waist a little longer, his gaze holding just enough possessiveness. Elena, with a journalist's skill, knew how to ask questions, steer conversations, and smile mysteriously when asked about their relationship. They were the perfect power couple in the public eye. But behind the curtain, cracks began to appear in their masks. During long car rides, the silence was no longer suffocating. Peter started telling her about his mother, a talented pianist who passed away when he was young, who had taught him that there is a melody in every number. He spoke of the pressure from his late father, a man who demanded perfection and never accepted failure. For the first time, Elena saw a different Peter Blackwood, a man carrying deep scars and profound loneliness. And she, unconsciously, began to let her guard down too. She told him about her dream of becoming an investigative journalist, about the time she was threatened for digging too deep into a case. She saw him listen, his gray eyes no longer cold but shining with genuine focus. Things became more complicated at a classical concert, an event Peter said was just for us. That night, he wasn't in a suit, just a simple turtleneck sweater. As the melodies of Rachmaninoff filled the air, he whispered in her ear, "This was my mother's favorite piece." In that moment, the wall of ice between them seemed to melt completely. But the real world wasn't a sweet melody. At a fundraising party, Mark, Elena's ex-boyfriend, suddenly appeared. He was now a famous financial journalist for a rival paper and made no secret of the fact that he was also targeting the Blackwood Group. "Elena, what a surprise," Mark said, his smile charming but his eyes full of calculation. "I didn't expect you to be so close to your subject of investigation." Peter, standing next to Elena, squeezed her hand lightly. The atmosphere immediately tensed. "She is my girlfriend," Peter said, his voice as cold as ice, a clear assertion of ownership. That brief confrontation planted a seed of doubt in Peter's mind. A few days later, he saw Elena and Mark talking privately at a coffee shop. In reality, Elena was trying to refuse Mark's offer to collaborate, but in Peter's eyes, it was a different picture. "What did he say to you?" Peter asked when she returned, his voice trying to remain calm but unable to hide the interrogation. "Just work stuff," Elena replied, feeling annoyed by his controlling tone. "You have no right to ask about that." "I have the right," he growled. "According to the contract, when you are with me, you are mine. I don't want my girlfriend secretly meeting with a man who is trying to take down my company." Their first argument ended in silence, but it left a crack in their slowly becoming real relationship. Peter became distant, while Elena felt guilty for the secrets she was keeping. At the same time, her investigation had a major breakthrough. She had traced the money from BLC Holdings to a series of overseas accounts, and on one of the most crucial transfer documents, one approving a massive transaction, she saw a familiar signature. Clear, unmistakable. Peter Blackwood. Elena's world crumbled. Everything she had started to believe about him, the vulnerability, the loneliness, the melody in the numbers, all vanished before that cold signature. He was an even better actor than she was. That night, they attended a birthday party for one of Peter's close friends. The atmosphere was more relaxed than usual, and after a few drinks, the tension between them seemed to ease. At the end of the party, when it was just the two of them on a windswept rooftop overlooking the sparkling city, Peter suddenly turned to her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "I acted like a fool. It's just, I'm not used to this feeling." "What feeling?" she asked, her heart pounding. "The feeling of being afraid to lose something," he replied, his gray eyes boring into hers. And then, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a fake kiss for the public. It was a real, passionate and desperate kiss, carrying all the chaos and emotion they had suppressed. Elena, for a moment, forgot everything. She forgot the signature, forgot BLC Holdings, forgot her role. All she knew was that she was being kissed by the man she had hopelessly fallen for. When the kiss ended, she looked at him, the conflict clear in her eyes. How could someone be so gentle, and yet so ruthless? While their feelings had just reached a new peak, the time bomb in Elena's investigation was also ticking down. She received an anonymous email. No subject, no body, just an attachment. Her heart hammered as she opened it. It was a series of internal documents, emails, and transaction records. It confirmed everything. Richard Hale was the mastermind. He had exploited Peter's trust, forging his signature on the most critical documents, while the less important ones were signed by Peter himself, completely unaware. Richard's scheme was bigger than just money laundering. He was collaborating with a competitor to gut the company from the inside, weaken it, and prepare for a hostile takeover. A chill ran down Elena's spine. Peter wasn't just innocent. He was standing on the brink of ruin without knowing it, and the traitor was the man he trusted most. But at the same time, the anonymous source sent her another message. He knows someone is investigating. Be careful. Elena realized she held not only Peter's career in her hands, but possibly his life and her own as well. The act was over. A life-or-death battle had just begun. The relief of Peter's innocence was quickly replaced by an enormous burden. Elena held the truth, but that truth was a double-edged sword. How could she bring it to light without putting Peter, her source, and herself in mortal danger? She decided she had to tell Peter. But how to begin? "Hi, your best friend is plotting to destroy you and I have the proof?" She needed a plan. But Richard Hale was one step ahead of her. Cunning as a fox, he had sensed the change. He realized the bond between Peter and Elena was no longer fake. And he decided to strike first. He set a perfect trap. Richard knew Elena and Mark still occasionally communicated. He intentionally leaked some false information to one of his insiders, knowing it would reach Mark. Mark, believing he had a scoop, arranged to meet Elena in a public place to exchange notes. Elena, though suspicious, went to the meeting, hoping to glean more information. At that exact moment, Peter, following an anonymous tip from Richard, also arrived at the location. And the sight he saw froze his heart. Elena, receiving a file from the hands of his biggest rival. Every doubt, every bit of jealousy, every fear of betrayal he had tried to suppress for so long exploded. That evening, he waited for her at the penthouse. The air was so cold and tense you could cut it with a knife. "Did you have a productive day at work?" he asked, his voice chillingly cold. "It was normal," she replied, sensing the coming storm. He threw a folder of photos onto the table. They were pictures of her and Mark from that afternoon. "Is this normal? Taking information from the man who wants to tear my company to shreds?" "It's not what you think," Elena tried to explain, but panic made her words jumble. "I can explain." "Explain?" He laughed bitterly. "What's left to explain? The contract? The dates? That kiss? It was all part of the plan, wasn't it? To get close to me, to gather information, and then sell it to that bastard?" "No, Peter, you have to believe me," she yelled, her eyes welling with tears. She was about to tell him the truth about Richard, but his words had stabbed her too deeply in the heart. "Believe you?" he roared, pain and fury blazing in his eyes. "I made that mistake once. There won't be a second time. The contract is terminated. Get out." He turned his back on her, a final, cruel gesture. Elena stood frozen, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had lost. Richard had won. Pushed out of Peter's life, Elena was left with only one option. She couldn't let Richard get away with it. She decided to publish the truth herself. She went to Mark, not as an ex-girlfriend, but as two journalists with a common goal. Together, they pieced together the evidence, writing a bombshell article, a powerful indictment aimed squarely at Richard Hale. "Are you sure about this?" Mark asked, looking at her with concern. "By doing this, you're putting yourself in his crosshairs." "I have nothing left to lose," she replied, her voice firm. The article was published. The city was shaken. Blackwood's stock faltered, but this time, the public and investigators' scrutiny was aimed directly at Richard. Richard, cornered and frantic, knew he had no way out. He ordered his men to take care of Elena. As she was leaving work, a black car blocked her path. It all happened too fast. She was dragged into the car, a cloth soaked in chloroform pressed firmly over her mouth. The world went dark. In his penthouse, Peter was pacing restlessly after reading the article. He realized he had made a terrible mistake. Just then, his computer screen displayed an alert. The GPS signal from Elena's fountain pen, a gift he had given her, was moving at high speed before stopping abruptly at an abandoned warehouse district by the docks. An icy sense of dread ran down his spine. He was about to call her when his phone rang. It was Mark. "Blackwood." Mark's voice was rushed and frantic. "I just saw Richard's men force Elena's car off the road. He's got her. I'm following, but I lost them." "Send me your last location," Peter roared, already grabbing his car keys. "I know where she is." Without a second's hesitation, he bolted out the door. He floored the gas, the sports car shooting through the night like a bullet. The fear of losing her was greater than any stock market crash. He arrived at the warehouse at the same time as the police Mark had called. Peter didn't wait. He was the first one to kick down the door and charge in. Inside, Elena was tied to a chair. Richard was holding a knife to her throat. "Blackwood, you got here faster than I thought," he snarled. "One more step, and the girl dies." Peter's eyes were bloodshot. All his usual coldness was gone, replaced by a primal rage. "Let her go, Hale. It's over." "Over?" Richard laughed maniacally. "It's over when I say it's over." In the split second Richard was distracted by the police's arrival, Peter moved. He lunged forward like a wild animal. He didn't care about the knife, didn't care about anything else. His only goal was Elena. He shoved Richard away forcefully, pulling Elena into his arms and shielding her with his own body. A bang echoed through the space. The police had fired a warning shot. Richard was subdued, but in the struggle, his blade had sliced across Elena's arm, leaving a deep gash. Blood began to soak her sleeve. "Elena!" Peter screamed, his voice breaking with fear. He held her tightly, feeling her body tremble. Don't close your eyes. Do you hear me?" She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with pain, but she still managed to smile. "This time, do you believe me now?" That question was like a dagger to Peter's heart. He leaned down, his voice shattering into pieces. "I believe you. I'm so sorry. Please, don't leave me." It was no longer the voice of a CEO. It was the plea of a man on the verge of losing his entire world. The white of the hospital was a cold, sterile white, swallowing all sound except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. In that monochromatic world, Peter Blackwood was a misplaced shadow. How long had he been sitting there? A day? Or a century? He didn't know. Time had frozen from the moment he saw Elena's blood spreading across her arm. His expensive suit was crumpled, his tie loosened, and the steel-gray eyes that once made Wall Street tremble were now bloodshot and sunken from lack of sleep and raw fear. For the first time in his life, the invincible CEO felt utterly helpless. He held Elena's soft but cold hand tightly, pressing it to his cheek, whispering words his proud mind had never before allowed. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm sorry for not believing you, for being an arrogant fool. Just wake up. I swear I'll never let you go again." A soft groan echoed. Peter's mind went blank. He snapped his head up. Elena's eyelashes fluttered, then slowly opened. Her hazel eyes, though tired and hazy, were looking at him. "Peter," her voice was as faint as a breath. "I'm here," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here." Elena looked around the room, then down at her bandaged arm. The memory came flooding back. "Richard." "He's been arrested," Peter cut in, his voice firm. "He can't hurt you anymore. Ever." She looked at him, her eyes holding a silent question. He understood. The doubt, the pain, the chasm between them. "I read the article," he said, his voice full of remorse. "I read everything. You were right from the start, and I let my pride and fear of getting hurt cloud my judgment. You risked your life to save me, while I pushed you away. I don't deserve forgiveness, Elena. But I deceived you too," she interrupted, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "I approached you with an agenda. I turned our relationship into part of my investigation. I'm no better." "No," he shook his head, squeezing her hand tighter. "You did what a journalist has to do. But your heart, it never lied, did it? I saw it in your eyes, even when I tried to deny it. I was just a coward, too afraid to face it." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "That fountain pen. I didn't put a tracker in it to control you. It was because, for a long time now, I'd started to fear for your safety. I just didn't know how to say it." That clumsy but sincere confession broke down Elena's final wall of defense. She began to cry, not from physical pain, but from release. They had walked through hell together, and on the other side, they found a truth that was raw and beautiful. No more contracts, no more pretending. Just two scarred souls finding healing in each other. When Emily and Mark walked in, they witnessed a scene they had never seen before. Peter Blackwood gently wiping away Elena's tears, his eyes filled with tenderness. Emily rushed over and hugged Elena. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me my brother back." Mark stood back, a complex expression on his face. He looked at Peter. No words were spoken, but an unspoken nod passed between the two men. The rivalry had dissolved, replaced by a grudging respect for the one who had saved the woman they both cared about. In the following days, the hospital became their own little world. Peter put his empire on hold, turning Elena's hospital room into his mobile office. He learned to peel apples clumsily, the pieces looking so pathetic that Emily had to laugh. He read her financial news but skipped over any articles about Richard or the scandal. They talked for hours, not about work, but about dreams, fears, and the little things that make up a life. They were rebuilding from the ashes, one brick of trust at a time. But the outside world waits for no one. Richard Hale, even behind bars, was still a venomous snake. He hired a team of high-powered lawyers and filed a countersuit against Elena and her newspaper for slander and defamation, claiming all the evidence was fabricated by her out of a personal vendetta after their contractual relationship ended. A new battle had begun. As soon as Elena was well enough to be discharged, Peter held a press conference. He stood before hundreds of cameras, no longer the cold, distant CEO. "The Blackwood Group has been through a storm," he said, his voice resonant and firm. "But that storm has passed. The guilty will pay the price. However, there is one person who has been unfairly dragged into this fight. Ms. Elena Parker, a journalist of integrity, who bravely sought the truth. Now, she faces a baseless lawsuit. I am here to declare that I and the full resources of the Blackwood Group will stand with her. We will not only win, we will ensure that justice is served to the very end." He turned, reached for Elena, who was standing in the wings, and pulled her out to stand beside him under the flashing lights. It was the clearest possible declaration to the world. She was his, and anyone who touched her was declaring war on him. The legal battle was long and exhausting. Richard's lawyers were cunning, focusing on the fake girlfriend contract, trying to paint a picture of Elena as a scorned gold digger seeking revenge. But they underestimated Peter and Elena's unity. They had become a team. Peter, with his sharp strategic mind, mapped out every move. Elena, with a journalist's meticulousness, worked with the legal team to string together every piece of evidence, finding holes in Richard's side of the story. In the process, Peter also confronted his own past. He had a long talk with Emily. For the first time, he listened to the full story of the pain and betrayal his sister had endured from Richard. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice full of regret. "I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot to protect you." That moment healed a deep wound in their family. Emily's emotional testimony in court about Richard's true nature and past became one of the decisive blows, stripping him of the jury's last shred of sympathy. Finally, Judgment Day arrived. Richard Hale was found guilty on multiple charges, facing a long prison sentence. Justice had prevailed. After the trial, Peter didn't take Elena to a fancy restaurant or a celebration party. He drove her to a quiet hill overlooking the entire city as it lit up for the night. The night air was cool, and under the starry sky, the silence between them was peaceful. "Before I met you, I thought my life was built on control and perfection," he began, his voice warm and deep. "You came and shattered all of it. You taught me that chaos has its own beauty, and that imperfection is what makes us human. You taught me how to trust again, even when it was terrifying." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes now filled with a deep and sincere love. He didn't kneel, he didn't have flowery words, he simply opened his heart. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a platinum ring with a single exquisitely cut diamond, simple yet elegant. "I can't promise you a life without storms," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "but I promise to always be your shelter in every storm. I promise to always trust you, even when the whole world doubts. Elena Parker, will you agree to be the only truth in my life?" Tears of happiness streamed down Elena's cheeks. She didn't say anything, just nodded frantically, her smile brighter than any of the city lights below. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, the fake contract was replaced by an eternal vow. 1 year later, the city wore a new coat. Spring had arrived, bringing with it fresh air and green buds stirring on every bare branch, a season of rebirth. And for Peter and Elena Blackwood, it was more than just a change in the weather. The walking iceberg of Wall Street had well and truly melted. Peter Blackwood was still a formidable force in the business world, but the coldness in his eyes had been replaced by a permanent warmth, especially when he looked at his wife. He learned to leave the office before sunset, learned that a quiet dinner with Elena was worth more than $1 billion deal. The charitable foundation named after his mother, now co-managed by the couple, had become one of the most prestigious organizations, giving wings to hundreds of young artistic talents who would have never had the chance to shine. He hadn't just built an empire, he was starting to create a legacy. Elena had also found her own path. After the trial, she left her old newsroom. With initial support from Peter, she founded the Parker Post, an independent online investigative news site. It quickly became a voice to be reckoned with in journalism, a place where the truth wasn't bent by commercial pressure or political power. She no longer had to hide in anyone's shadow to find her stories. Now, she was the one creating the stage for the truth to be heard. The penthouse at the top of Blackwood Tower was no longer a cold display of power. It had become a home. Their mornings often began with a lively debate at the breakfast table. "You can't call that supply chain optimization, Peter," Elena said, stirring her coffee, her eyes scanning a tablet. "That is clearly labor exploitation in developing countries. And I'm going to write about it." Peter sipped his tea, his expression calm. "I'm not saying you shouldn't write about it. I'm just saying, if you're going to quote their financial report, use the audited figures from the last quarter. It will make your argument twice as strong." Elena looked up, a sly smile playing on her lips. "See? This is why I keep you around." He grinned, a smile that was now familiar and easy. "I thought so too." They had become a power couple in the truest sense. One who builds, one who watches, one who saw the numbers, one who saw the stories behind them. They didn't always agree, but they always respected each other. Trust, the thing they had paid such a high price for, had become the unshakable foundation of their life together. One weekend afternoon, they drove out to the countryside together. They arrived at a quiet cemetery, situated on a windy hill. They stood before a white marble tombstone, on which the name Catherine Blackwood was engraved. Peter placed a bouquet of pure white lilies down. He no longer wore the melancholic expression he had on his previous solo visits. Instead, there was a sense of peace. He took Elena's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Mom," he said softly, his voice warm and low, "I found her. The woman you once said would come and break all my rules. She's stubborn, annoying, and always thinks she's right." He glanced at Elena, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "But she taught me how to truly live, not just exist. I think you would have liked her very much." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, her heart filled with a warm emotion. She looked down at the grave, as if silently promising the woman she had never met that she would take care of her precious son. The lives of those around them had also turned new pages. Emily had found the love of her life, a gentle architect who looked at her with adoration, completely free of calculation. She had opened a small art gallery, turning her passion into a career. The scar Richard had left had faded, giving way to a bright future. Mark, after that bombshell article, had become one of the top investigative journalists in the country. He and Peter maintained a complex relationship. They weren't friends, but they were no longer enemies. Sometimes, they were fierce competitors in business and on the news front. Other times, they were reluctant allies when facing a larger common enemy. Between them was an unspoken respect, built from the ashes of a crisis. As for Richard Hale, that name was now just a faint memory, a costly lesson in betrayal. He was serving his sentence in a maximum security prison, and the world had moved on without him. One evening, as they were celebrating their first wedding anniversary on the very hill where Peter had proposed, Elena looked at him with a mysterious expression. "I have a gift for you," she said. "Something to mark the beginning of a new chapter." Peter raised an eyebrow. "Another dossier on some CEO you're about to expose?" She giggled, shaking her head. She handed him a small box, wrapped in silver blue paper. He opened it carefully. Inside, it wasn't an expensive watch or some tech gadget. It was a tiny pair of knitted booties, ivory white. Peter was stunned. He stared at the booties, then looked up at Elena, his eyes wide with disbelief and a powerful emotion welling up inside him. "Elena?" he whispered, his voice cracking. She just smiled, a radiant and gentle smile. She placed a hand on her stomach. "Our next contract," she said softly. "Term, 18 years, with possible extensions." Joy erupted on Peter's face, an emotion so intense and pure it overwhelmed him. He dropped the box and rushed to embrace her, burying his face in her hair, his laughter and tears mingling together. He held her as if she were the most precious and fragile treasure in the world. They had started with a play, a contract built on deceit and calculation. They had navigated storms of betrayal, doubt, and life-threatening danger. But in the end, they had found something more solid than any empire. They had found family. Standing on the hilltop, hand in hand, they looked down at the sparkling city below. The play had long since ended. The battle was over. And now, before them, a new legacy, a legacy of truth and love, was just beginning to be written.